Okay. All right, so we've got the signal. We're ready to go. Welcome, everybody. We're here for our fourth session of the day, and I guess the last session was amazing because we're a little bit behind. So I'm just going to direct you right to the moderator for today, who is Tiffany Goodlett, and she is a partner with August Leadership and a big supporter of TechNation. So welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation too, Christine. I always appreciate it. Big supporter of TechNation, that is for sure. Just before we dive in, I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the chat. I think we've all been using it all throughout the day, but let's make sure that any questions that you have for the panel, let's get them put right in there. So yes, Tiffany Goodlett, I'm a partner with August Leadership. We're a global executive search firm, and as the other panelists on the phone today or on the call today, we're quite passionate about increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion around the world, certainly in the technology industry, and also by leveraging technology wherever possible. So joining me today is Mark Patterson, and also Mark, who is the Executive Director of Magnet. And that's an innovative and inclusive platform that connects individuals and businesses and those opportunities and bringing people together. And also on the line is Anna Klimbovskaya. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, and I apologize if I did. Okay, good. And Anna is the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of Diversio. And that is another platform, a people intelligent platform. It helps organizations to measure, track, and improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. So great panel. This is a subject that we're all pretty passionate about. And maybe just to dive in and start off the conversation, we do want to keep it kind of a free flow. We'd love to see your questions come through on the chat, and we'll deal with those as well. But maybe to start, like Anna and then Mark, to just tell us a little bit about the organization that you're in, a little bit about you, and how the two of you, how your organization's evolved because of you and your background. So Anna, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about you and about Diversio.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Tiffany. It's really great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So in terms of Diversio, really kind of, I think, high-level background, we started the company 3 years ago now, and it really has been a bit of a whirlwind. In terms of my personal background, prior to Diversio, I was director with the Office of the CEO at RBC, and there I led the bank's thought leadership on the future of work. And something that was very interesting in that conversation is that while we talked about AI and automation and, you know, the skills for the future, we also talked very extensively about diversity and inclusion. And that being something that the bank has been invested in for such a long time, that being, frankly, a metric and kind of a strength of the organization, and something that would prepare it to succeed in you know, as an enterprise or in its organization in the future. And my co-founder, actually Laura, the CEO of Diversio, she was over at McKinsey, and about half her practice was advising Fortune 500s on diversity and inclusion strategy. And by just virtue of our jobs, we kind of had a lot of intersection with CEOs and executives across Fortune 500s in Canada, the US, kind of, and beyond that. And something that we found that was really interesting is that at this point, CEOs get it. The business case has been made. Everyone understands the importance of diversity and inclusion. There's no one out there being like, convince me. Everyone understands. But the challenge is that when you're talking to a CEO, a lot of the time you hear that, you know, oh, we do unconscious bias training once a year. We go on a retreat, we celebrate Pride. But at the end of the day, my executive team looks like it did, you know, 10 years ago. And it feels like this unsolvable problem. And so ultimately what we realized is that the reason there was so many challenges associated with diversity and inclusion is that people were still treating it as this nebulous concept as opposed to something very concrete. And we approached it the same way that you would approach any other business opportunity or business challenge, which is with data, metrics, robust goal setting, and tracking over time. And what we ended up building is a really cool, obviously I'm biased, but in my opinion, a really cool platform, an end-to-end solution where we go into organizations, we take in data directly from their employees on identity and demographics, as well as experience. And with our technology, we're able to essentially identify any areas of systemic differences in employee experience. So maybe unconscious biases or barriers to advancement. And after identifying these issues, we actually now use AI and matching algorithms to help organizations fix them with targeted interventions. And the AI component is interesting because, and the reason it's needed is because what works at an RBC is not going to be the same thing that works at a Shopify or an IKEA, because they're very different organizations. And so that's ultimately kind of the beauty of the technology solution to this challenge, is that you can get very targeted and very specific. And now, honestly, it feels like it's been a bit of a whirlwind, like I said, but we work extensively with enterprise, kind of Fortune 500 globally, companies like Accenture, Danone, Honda, Viacom, CBS, the city of Toronto, right here at home. So it's definitely something that's becoming quite a pervasive approach to the D&I question.
That's great. Thank you. That quest for data around these numbers is critical. I look forward to coming back to that. Mark, please tell us a little bit about Magnet and you.
Yeah, so again, thanks for having me, and thanks to TechNation, and good to see you again, Anna. So Magnet is actually a project at Ryerson University. My background it's kind of interesting. I came from kind of private sector entrepreneur most of my life, and ended up working at Ryerson. I was hired on I think a 2-month contract to help launch their MBA program. Long story short, got into helping students transition into employment, and started to see a lot of the issues that people faced in their own kind of personal journey. So it was very kind of impacted by, students with disabilities that were having challenges transitioning, international students, newcomers, people that had a lot to offer and yet weren't seeming to connect in the same way, and really kind of working through that with them on a personal level, and realizing that that's one way of doing it, but it's not really going to scale. And spent a lot of time thinking about it as well. We have a massive publicly funded system to support transition of people, whether they're facing barriers to employment or they're in transition, maybe have been laid off and so on. So we have a massive publicly funded system. And yet, as Anna mentioned, a lot of these issues seem to be continuing. So became very focused on helping to identify ways at a systems level to address some of these issues. And for this group, I think, for people on the call, to explain it, we took Ryerson as an institution, created a trademark called Magnet, and then partnered with technology companies. So you could think of us in a way like an accelerator of innovative technology companies working together. So it's also my belief, that some of the systemic level issues are only going to be solved by multiple technology partners. So at the infrastructure technology layer, the digital infrastructure layer, it's only going to be solved by multiple technologies working together. And so, I've been really excited over the last while to see a lot of different companies that are represented on, even this FutureWave conference, that are playing different pieces of it. So we look at integrating together multiple technologies to support transition of people, mostly being supported in the publicly funded employment services space. And just to give you an example, this as context, I always ask, how much do you think the province of Ontario spends on supporting labor transitions for persons with disabilities? So not the actual wage subsidy, not ODSP, but actually just the support services to help people transition. It's about $1.8 billion a year, just in the province of Ontario. People with disabilities tend to have, so you could have a master's degree with a significant disability and have less or lower employment outcomes than a high school dropout. So, and a lot of it is reaching back. So I think we'll get into some of this as the discussion continues. Technology is a part of the solution, and it's really exciting to see all the companies that are evolving in this space. And there are a lot of other things that we need to look at kind of at a systems level as well. And data, obviously very important.
Yeah, I do think that's really important and enables some decision making, I'm sure. Just for everyone who's joining in and listening, I would appreciate it if you could put in either a number on a scale of 1 to 10 to describe how you believe your organization is diversity, equity, and inclusion, or you can put just a word to describe how well you think you're doing. And that can include hiring people with disabilities or diverse candidates, as well as just having an eye on what those metrics are. So please go ahead in the chat and just give us some thoughts as to where's everyone at? Where do you think your organizations are at? And we'll continue with the conversation as you populate for that. And thanks very much for putting those in. So let's start at the beginning. We were talking, the title of our session is around the future of diverse, equitable, and inclusive hiring. So maybe let's just take a look at that particular section first. Where would you say we are with intelligent recruiting and recruiting that is going to make a difference when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And Anna, maybe I could ask you to start and then followed by Mark.
Yeah, definitely. Also, Tiffany, I was going to say your video was off. I don't know if you knew that.
No,
you're back now. You're back now. You were off for a bit.
I think that is my country internet. I'm in from the Caledon Hills, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So my apologies.
Oh my gosh, it's just like the pandemic kind of catchphrase, right? It's just Zoom problems. Yeah, I love that question. I think there's so many innovative things that are happening in recruiting and hiring. I think I'll talk about some of the great things that we're seeing, but also some of the potential challenges that we're seeing as obviously organizations are implementing technology, and some of the, not just like dangers that may manifest if you're kind of not aware of the potential problems. So I think some of the really interesting things that we're seeing from a technology perspective is the ability to really recruit more people by leveraging technology to make your job postings more accessible and more inclusive. And so one of the companies that we typically recommend and that we kind of have as part of our recommendation engine is a company called Textia, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. But really what they do is that they have artificial intelligence algorithms that process your job posting language for inclusive language. And what this means is that oftentimes as you're describing a role or as you're describing a job posting, you might be using adjectives just, that come naturally to you as you're typing the job description. But ultimately there is an unconscious bias incorporated there that will dissuade certain groups of people systemically from applying for the role. So for example, if you are looking for a a business development hire, and you say you're looking for, aggressive and, kind of salespeople that don't take no for an answer. This is generally language that may not resonate with certain applicants. Traditionally, women are not as responsive to language that, describes a role as aggressive. On the flip side, if you use and you tweak your language slightly to maybe say a tenacious and passionate business development person, which ultimately gets at the same sort of characteristic, you will advance, and you will significantly expand the pool, the diversity of applicants, or the diversity of people who are applying for the role. I think Textio's, and don't quote me on this, but Textio's kind of takeaway figure is that they can diversify your candidate pool up to 40% just by changing some of the language, changing some of the words, not changing the meaning, but changing the way that meaning is communicated. I think that that's really, really interesting, and that's kind of an exciting innovation that we're seeing in the diversity and inclusion space, and that the future work of technology. I think the flip side of that is some of the challenges that we're experiencing and encountering. A classic example is Amazon and the algorithms that they built in order to basically expedite the process of going through candidates and selecting the candidates with the highest potential to fill a specific role. For technical roles, especially what the algorithm started to do is it started choosing men over women systemically. And the question was, why? Like, do men just make better engineers or better developers than women? The answer is no. But the problem with algorithms, the problem with AI is that it learns based on big data. And the data that this algorithm particularly was learning from was data of other individuals who filled similar positions across Amazon in the past. And because the technology sector has predominantly or traditionally been a field that's dominated by men, at least, over the past 10 years, what the algorithm learned was that, men are better suited for the roles, and it started perpetuating that bias. And, picking up on things, for example, not even names necessarily, but even schools that certain individuals went to, or clubs that they were part of, for example, girls volleyball club or whatever in high school, you would be penalized for. And so ultimately they actually had to scrap the algorithm because it was trained on bad data. And so I think it's really interesting that there are these two kind of schools of thought right now. One is that technology can absolutely help and absolutely kind of unlock networks and individuals and candidates for you that you may have not had access to before, may have just missed out on. But at the same time, technology can sometimes, hinder that access. So it's all about how you use it and all about the questions that you ask when you're implementing some of these solutions.
Yeah, those are great points. Those questions, and being really inquisitive as to what are the parameters that are built into this thing. I think that is a concern that a number of people have, especially because that news story about Amazon just hit the waves and oh no. Mark, how would you like to add to that conversation around hiring and where we're at?
Yeah, so I think the one distinction that I would draw is I think a lot of the new technology tools are being used by medium to large enterprise, and there's some sophistication in understanding and being aware of some of the challenges. As Anna mentioned, there's no argument in a lot of larger enterprise around the benefits of diversity. There's not always kind of the parallel focus on managing diversity that is needed to have kind of retention and all of those other pieces. But where we're focused and we see a particular need is in a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that obviously are the largest, in aggregate, the largest employer group in Canada. And there are still significant challenges there. You don't have to get too far outside a major center into rural areas where also the community can be a challenge. Is it a welcoming community where diverse people want to settle and live, newcomers as just one example. So I think technology tools are amazing, and they're certainly we need to keep an eye not to repeat what Anna has already covered. But we're thinking a lot of how we actually scale it and what are the other wraparounds to the technology, because the technology is not going to be the only piece of the solution. So that's some of the things that were mentioned around even workshops for SMEs or capacity building for SMEs to understand just the what Anna talked about in the job postings, right? How job postings are written. And building that understanding. Also, as I kind of alluded to, diversity, the research is clear, the case is clear, diversity is a fact, inclusion is often a choice. So, our society is diverse. If you as an employer choose to include diverse people, it often is a choice and being intentional about it. So we focus a lot on SMEs. We also focus on encouraging businesses to look further upstream. So even into high school, into work integrated learning experiences. You can't expect to just hire highly competent, trained, experienced people that are diverse if we're not, as a system, providing opportunity right from early stages. So that's where we focus a lot of our time. And the technologies and emerging technologies are very exciting because they're tools that can help. But I think there's a lot of wraparound services that are still required. And you'll see this. I know Diversio puts on workshops as well on all the wraparound to the technology, and I think that's a really important piece not to lose sight of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good points. And you brought up the fact that a lot of, or the majority of work in Canada is really led by entrepreneurs, small businesses, who may have a concern around the cost of implementing some of these technologies to help them increase this. I think that there's also that mindset of they're so busy doing everything, how can they do anything differently? But what would you say to those entrepreneurs about the ease or the affordability and maybe the payoff of some of these technologies to help them to become more inclusive employers?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I used to work at the digital media zone at Ryerson in the early days as a director helping companies. And when we did a workshop on, if you're doing workshops, so you'd have one workshop on raising money, you'd have another workshop on hiring the right talent. Out of the 10 workshops, talent would always be the 10th one. When I would always argue to the team that actually talent and taking the time and separating to hire the right people is probably one of the most important things you could be doing, because you're in that kind of whack-a-mole, whatever, because you may not have the right team members. So the first thing I would say to them is not a technology advice, is to take the time to hire the right people, because I think those of us that have been there and have teams and so on recognize how critical that is. And so for early stage startups, that's I think an important point. But being intentional, then making a decision. So I think that before you even get into the technology, making a decision that I'm going to have a diverse workforce, and that I'm going to support that diversity. I'm going to be culturally aware. We're going to celebrate that, because diversity, the reason it breeds innovation is diversity of opinion. Not managed properly, that becomes conflict, right? Mm-hmm. So those we spend a lot of time on those kind of wraparounds, like I said before, and then investing in the tools. So making sure that you're posting. So some of the tools that have been mentioned to create, one of the things that SMEs hate doing is writing a job posting. So they usually just call a friend. That perpetuates the issues. So there are a lot of those tools that are not expensive. It's not like implementing a big enterprise system. There are tools that can be used in the process. So what we've been focused on is making kind of that collection of tools, toolkits, accessible and supporting. And we work with a lot of like local chamber organizations supporting. So there might be a combination of workshops and technology and tools. So what is a tool for the SME that we can, that's not cost prohibitive, that they can engage in? But it does start with making that commitment and understanding the benefit, as we've talked about, of diversity and having a diverse team, which is very, very clear. Again, we've said that a few times, but just to reiterate, but also making sure you're prepared to manage it and you know, participate in your community. Like a lot of our committed employers in more rural areas are also very active in their communities, ensuring that the community is welcoming. Because if your children, so if you go to, you know, you don't, again, I live in Eastern Ontario, you don't have to go too far till there is not very much diversity. And if your children aren't going to be accepted in the local school or have challenges, you're going to have a problem with retention. If your community is not welcoming, you're going to have a challenge. So I know I keep mentioning this, we're here to talk about the technology piece, but I think the technology is a tool and there are a bunch of pieces that wrap around that. And it's not like the technology is going to be the panacea to the problem. And it starts with kind of commitment and motivation, but there are tools, if you're committed to that, there are all kinds of tools and a lot of resources you can learn from. And I would argue that you need to be looking at this to attract the talent. You need to be attracting diverse talent, even if you're in rural Ontario, to build your company. And we will have a much more, I think, post-COVID, have a much more distributed, flexible work environment where remote work and other work is more accessible. So that's another whole conversation, but interesting as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think with that, and sorry, Anna, I think you were just going to add.
No worries, thanks, Stephanie. I was going to say, I think that's very, very true, and you know, being mindful. I think one of the things that I think is just table stakes is for organizations to move beyond, you know, mentally when it from the idea of recruiting and the idea of, you know, just getting that talent through the door, and really focus on, okay, what is the experience once the individuals arrive? Because truly, like, the majority of the life cycle within the company is not the recruiting phase, it's the actual advancement and, you know, working and having empowered employees within the organization. And that's 100%. So that's honestly basically kind of what we do. And I think the really interesting component is starting to measure inclusion within the company. And the way that we're working with organizations, how we're approaching it is identifying very concrete metrics. So we have 6 that we validated academically with some of our, you know, partners like U of T and University of Waterloo, Dalhousie, Alan Turing Institute, kind of, et cetera. And the way that we approach these metrics is we compare between group experiences. So what this means is we first identify the dominant group in an organization, and that is the profile of person that appears most frequently at the executive level. Typically, this is a dynamic approach, but typically what we're seeing, at least in North America, that tends to be white, heterosexual men without a disability. You know, not shocking, at least kind of general trends. We do have clients that, you know, that's not the case, but overall. And then looking at, okay, how is this dominant group experiencing the organization versus other groups in the company? So very, very numbers driven. So for example, if your dominant group is, I don't know, a 9 out of 10 on culture. So they're feeling heard, they're feeling valued, they're really part of the team. But the people of color in the company are 4 out of 10 on culture. It's that delta that then tells you that there's a systemic barrier being faced by people of color that's just not faced by the dominant group. And what you're able to do once you identify those specific challenges, those hotspots, of exclusion within the organization is you can start putting goals around and performance goals around inclusion as well as diversity. So for example, you know, a lot of our organizations, a lot of our clients now are actually tying executive compensation, for instance, to their performance on our inclusion scorecard. So one of our clients actually tied up to 8% of executive bonus at the end of the year to how they're performing on inclusion within their department. And that's honestly really fantastic, because what you're ultimately saying is, yes, of course, you know, recruiting and getting that diverse environment within the organization is important, but then how are those folks feeling? Are they empowered to be doing their best work? Are they succeeding on a day-to-day basis? Are we going to retain them, frankly, long-term? Because otherwise they're literally just going to leave and all your recruiting is just going to go to waste. And that's ultimately what the focus is turning towards. And I think, you know, with these goals and with these hard numbers, with these metrics, you're able to ultimately start really moving the needle in a meaningful way, because you can start setting those targets and tracking.
That's great. And what advice would you give to organizations that are joining us to encourage employees to self-identify? Because there's often a lot of reluctance to do that. And I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that using some of these metrics and analytics, it relies on the data going in. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. That's a very astute question. I think that there's a number of things that are just kind of table stakes. So number one, we ask, so the survey that we deploy is anonymous. It is not tied to HRIS. We ask we message that very, very clearly. There's also minimum reporting thresholds. So if there is a group of people who are fewer than 8, then we don't report on those numbers, because there's a chance that someone would be kind of exposed through their answers, and that's not what the exercise is about. We do see that, frankly, this is not necessary. But it is helpful to go with an external provider. The reason I say this is because, you know, people just feel more secure a lot of the time self-identifying when there is that third party that's reputable in the space. So for example, you know, one of our enterprise clients in the financial services space mentioned that 3 times as many people identified as being LGBTQ when we collected the data as when they did something similar the previous year. So that is that additional layer, additional component of trust. However, I will say that if you are budget strapped, or you know, you just don't have the funds or the resources to bring in an external provider, you can still do this yourself. And over time, the trust of your employees will build up, and they will come to you with that feedback, and they will really, really double down. When we work with organizations, if a company has never done a survey similar to this before, we usually see an average response rate of about 60%. By the time we're doing this for the second or third time, that response rate jumps to over 80%. So even with us, you know, it takes some time for people to say, okay, we're safe, and our company is actually doing something about this, so let me get involved, let me start contributing. And that's generally kind of the trend. So don't get discouraged, and also anonymity.
Yeah, and I'm sure just how the organization is known will definitely affect that level of trust. So it's always working on that piece too. Mark, so I wonder if we can keep this theme going, but I'm curious about how organizations can maybe do a better into talent pool of diverse candidates. You know, that's not just looking at LinkedIn, for example, like how to do a better job of matching talent that's out there, diverse talent, into the opportunities that are available at different organizations.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question. I think one of the main things that I would encourage all of the companies on the call is to, again, take advantage of hiring and being really intentional about hiring diverse candidates earlier in their career. So taking advantage of work integrated learning, and TechNation has even a program funded by the federal government to help support employers to hire students from institutions, post-secondary institutions. So currently it's at 75% of the salary for a work integrated learning experience. And you can reach out to Brett if you're looking for that. But I think that's really important. We've talked to a lot of large companies as well. So I'll just use an example. I won't mention a bank, but large banks have summer intern programs. Being intentional about hiring diverse candidates early, giving opportunity to diverse candidates. So it could be a student with a disability. And you'll start to see a big difference as well over time. And we need to, I think as a system, we need to be nurturing and mentoring diversity in all of its aspects. We can't expect it to just find the right candidates for board positions or senior executive positions if we're not all collectively investing in early stage recruiting and support. So there are things we can do, making sure we're being intentional, not just going to the same source we've always gone to when we're looking for more senior executive positions. One of the things that bugs me is often people will say, well, I couldn't find anybody or nobody applied. You need to be really intentional and go back to being intentional. There, you can tap into other sources. If you were out fishing and you weren't catching anything, you wouldn't keep going back to the same pool. So it's kind of the same when you're recruiting. Like you need to change your tactics. But one point I would like to really make, and we've been pushing on pretty hard, is one of the reasons, for example, students with disabilities have less employment outcomes after is we talk to large companies and say, well, we're really interested in hiring and we're going to create a level playing field, but the students with disabilities don't have the same level of experience as these other students, right? Well, it's because we didn't give it to them, right? We weren't intentional, and we all need to invest. And I would argue that across all areas, mentoring and supporting and being more inclusive through the entire talent supply chain is really important overall to understand. But if you're talking about, we hear all the time, people say, well, I tried to find a woman to be on my board, but I couldn't find anybody. You're not looking in the right place and you're not looking hard enough. So I think there's the two sides that I'd like to emphasize.
Like that being intentional, planful, proactive, and really thinking down the road a little bit as to what we really want our economy to look like in terms of the skills. And
when we give, for example, when we give youth experience, they might not stay at your organization, but it's added to their skill set and it's added to society, our labor force overall. So investing in students and giving them opportunities is really important.
No, that's great. So I know we've got a little bit over time, but we started a little bit late. So we'll just go a few more minutes here. If anyone has any questions for our panel, please put it in the chat box. And so just back to the data and metrics. So Anna, you talked about that. I think that you mentioned 6 metrics that you use with organizations. Do you have a short primer for the organizations that are joining us here today on, what are the top 3 or maybe it is this top 6 metrics that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. Happy to share. And also, if anyone is really interested in the methodology, please reach out. We have a white paper that we're open sourcing the methodology. So yeah, happy to kind of give you a little kind of dry, but interesting, I think. The metrics themselves are inclusive culture. So whether or not you feel heard and valued by your team, access to networks, which is whether someone is invested in your growth and career development in the organization. Flexible work, which is that work-life balance, very important, especially, affects parents and caretakers. Safe work environment, which is basically code for no harassment. If you're thinking about it as a Maslow's hierarchy, that's the foundational one. You can't have that in the organization. And a of fair management. So specifically managers that are really give everyone equal opportunity and are invested in their team equally. So those are the 5 that we use to measure inclusion. And then the 6th that we look at is recruiting and hiring. So this is that piece that we were talking about, which is, whether that talent is coming in. And this measure is actually not based on your feeling, but it is an objective evaluation of how diverse your most recently hired cohort of employees is. Is it representative of the population, or is it not? I think the really interesting thing, that we do as well is benchmarking. There's no, because we have so many organizations, we have about 21,000 companies in our data set now, we're really able to start identifying those trends between industries. And ultimately, there's no sector, honestly, that has figured it out. Like, no one is out there boasting, like, we solved it, we're like the most diverse and inclusive sector. But by being able to kind of benchmark yourselves against peers and then really pulling on those best practices from those industry leaders, we're seeing organizations almost leapfrog over some challenges really starting.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I think we've all been writing down those six top ones right there. And thoughts around being very intentional and planful right from the get-go about what's the kind of talent that we're looking for, and let's go after them, and not accept I couldn't find any. And I would say, coming from executive search, let's make sure that whoever we're leveraging as partners externally to bring in talent, that they're also casting very wide nets and not coming back to say, I can't find any. That's just not acceptable anymore. So any last final pieces of words of advice, Mark and then Anna, for our guests who have joined us here for this session today? Any final words on really the future of inclusive hiring, and I would say retention? Mark?
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. Again, oops, phone. Be intentional. That's something else. I should have turned off notifications, sorry. Be intentional. And just invest a little bit of time in understanding what tools can help support you to do that. And think about your whole kind of supply chain and building talent for the future. I think it's critical as we're moving forward. Like I said, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice, and focus on making sure you have an inclusive team, and then track it. Hire Diversio, or figure it out. If you're only a 10-person company, figure it out yourself, but you do need to track and measure, because what gets measured, it's done. Right? So.
Yeah, exactly. I would say collect the data, collect the numbers. Also, the case needs to be made, and I think a lot of leaders get this now, but since this is the audience, I'm assuming there's mostly HR folks on the call, this cannot be a side of desk thing. So often right now we're seeing, we go into organizations and there's one person who's like really passionate about it, so they're driving it side of desk, and you are under-resourced, and you just don't have the ability to really dedicate allocate the time and the energy that is needed to really do this well. And so actually with our companies that we work with, we typically find that their budgets, after kind of engaging with us for diversity and inclusion, frankly, either double or triple. And they either, designate someone as their D&I person officially, or they bring someone in. So if you need any help with kind of building out that case for leadership or whatever, please reach out to me. But generally speaking, this isn't a side of desk thing anymore. This is absolutely table stakes. We have the data that makes the case to leadership.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both very, very much. So that intentionality, the planfulness, the leveraging data and metrics to really understand what is the work environment. And then I would say also, again, back to intentionality, turn over rocks, be prepared to deal with some of the muck that you find within organizations and within our own organizations, and perhaps within our own behaviors as well, to really make a big difference. I think Brett has joined us back in this group chat and wanted to wrap things up from here. But so just a quick thank you both, Mark and Anna, for doing this. Really appreciate your participation.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Hi, Brett. I'll let you. I just wanted to make sure you got back in.
Good stuff. Thank you for that, Christine. Yeah, love the content from this session. Not surprised at all. Mark and Anna are phenomenal speakers, and really great to see you guys again too. And thanks to Tiffany for moderating. It was fantastic to have your insights guiding this conversation and having this opportunity to meet with you. Instead of going to the main stage, I just figured I'd kind of come here quickly to wrap things up. Thank you all again for attending today's session. I learned so much, and I know that an event is successful when I can feel the wheels turning, and I've got lots of ideas and notes flowing, and that's certainly happened for me today. So thanks again for coming. I want to remind you all that this event continues next week, same time, same channel. So FutureWave Day 2 is the theme for that day is the future of education. So we'll look at upskilling and reskilling for the future, diversity and meaningful mentorship, proven potential project-based learning, innovative will models, how industry and academia are partnering. We've got some really great folks coming back to us as well. Plato Testing and Seawell will be joining us along with some new guests. I feel like I'm wrapping up the Oscars or something. Skyhive, D2L, Pluralsight, Microsoft, Onyx Initiative, which is an incredible organization. I can't speak highly enough of them, working to expand the Black tech talent pipeline. Ripen, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Rogers, Spotify, and lots of other academic institutions too, so be really well-rounded. And if anyone is feeling as excited as I am or feeling electric, if you refresh your browser, there's a new kind of button that will be up, I think, over here on the left. It's two handshaking, and it's a networking tool. So if you're lonely in isolation in COVID and you want to meet some like-minded people that have been brought here, please do refresh your browser, come back to the networking area, and it'll just connect you on one-on-one sessions, and you can keep refreshing and meeting new people, or you can wrap up for the day. My name is Brett Hodes. I'm with Tech Nation. You can find me on LinkedIn, send me an email. Look forward to connecting with you, and we'll chat next week. Thanks, everybody.